Hi guys, I wanted to do that all the books I read in 2024. I saw these videos and also there's like a spicy discourse on the internet about people reading, and I was like, let me just add some fuel. In 2024 I read 61 books. That doesn't really mean anything because I read all types of books. I think 2023 and 2024 I was kind of out of my slump and like consistently reading. Yeah, I am at a place where I'm starting to narrow down what type of genres I enjoy. Also like a very like mood reader. So my emotional state, the environment, what's going on in my life really shapes the type of books I'm attracted to. But like I'm at a point where I know what type of prose I like, what type of style I like, what type of storytelling I like, and all of that fun stuff. I don't believe in this hierarchy of books where you have to read this type of specific books in order for you to be like a reader, because literature can be incredibly gatekeepy and exclusive and also extractive. That's one of the reasons actually I'm not gonna put any reading goals for 2024, at least number-based reading goals. I'm gonna talk more about that later. So I kind of classified the types of books that I'm reading. Memoir, fluff, romance, escapism books, way of the world, or a philosophy or like a life manual is the next one. Probably one of my largest one. And then another one that kind of contrasts with that, which is understanding the world beyond me. And then poetry. I'm not a big fantasy person, but I read one fantasy book that might have changed the way I think about fantasy book. I read a couple of classics, even though classics is a very polarizing term for sure. Very fiction or slice of life, short stories, and graphic novels. I read a lot of graphic novels, but like this year is actually one of the lowest counts of graphic novels. I don't know. This is actually one of the few last books I read. Thanks for the Money, How to Use My Life Story to Become the Best Joel McHale You Can Be by Joel McHale. I didn't like it. I didn't like this book. I usually like comedians writing about their life, but it felt like maybe it was the style of the writing, maybe the way the storytelling, it just didn't really flow. It felt incredibly disjointed. But you know, it was read. I think this is my favorite memoir I read this year. I'm almost done, maybe like 20 pages away. Men We Reap by Jasmine Ward. A book that is like about her family story, specifically men that got killed in the 90s in New Orleans. In her family, in her neighborhood, seeing like men basically disappear every day from different types of violence. This was actually recommended by one of my friends when they were here from New Mexico. I saw the book on the thing, and actually I thought it said something else, and I was like, oh, like, is this any good? And they were like, I cannot like stop reading this book. I have had this for like 6 or 7 years now. It does its thing, you know. Basically, I get my books from Libby, and then I just like convert it to the Kindle, and I put it on airplane mode so that I have it longer. That doesn't really affect the library or anything, but as one of the hacks that I've learned, like especially if you're like a slower reader, which I can be. In terms of the escapism fluffy books, I read I Wish You All the Best by Mason Deaver. Let me just say this, actually I reread that book. It's right here. This is it. It's okay. This is my second time reading it. I don't think I'd read it, and I got it from thrift books, I think, and I was pleasantly surprised. Like the second time read was better, and they basically, it's like they're like moving with their sister, like that type of stuff, and then meeting this boy at school and like falling in love. Very cute, but the story felt like not as fleshed out as I like my romance books. I love romance books, even though like Emily Henry and stuff is my sister's. I'm gonna get into it soon. And then so a big part of my reading this year was like Done Me. So Done Me is Two Boys and Falling in Love. It's Chinese writings usually. I should have organized this before. These are the books. They're pretty thick. They're basically, this is the Heaven's Official Blessing. It's by a Chinese writer. Books have been around for a while, but they got translated. They're originally in Chinese. So these are all my friend's physical copy. I have to return it to her actually. Incredible. Prose, the writing is just wonderful. You know, escapism, it's fun, there's action, the way the prose is laid out, the way the pacing feels really good, even though it's 8 volumes, the volume is this long. Very good, very good. Right now I just started another book of hers. It's like actually the first book she wrote. It's the Scum Villains Self-Saving System. This is really fun too. The story is like criticism of trashy books written in this like very predictable, categorically fan servicey way, and she's kind of criticizing that through this book, doing that, but like kind of disrupting some of the tropes that are usually typical in books like this. Love her writing style. It's just incredible. Nothing went wrong at such crucial junction in the novel storyline that meant it wasn't exciting enough. Like, it's so meta too. Really enjoying this. I just finished the first volume. My friend's gonna bring the rest. There's like 4 or yeah, there's 4 more. The Way of the World, aka Life Manual. I read On Bullshit by Harry Frankfurt. I read Healing the Shame That Binds You by John Bradshaw. How to Be Alone If You Want to and Even If You Don't Want to by Lane Moore. Hopeless Aromantic by Samantha Rindal. Single on Purpose by John Kim. Drama Free by Nendra Glover Twab. I Want to Die But I Want to Eat the Bookie. Radical Acceptance. How to Win Friends and Influence People. Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents. All About Love by Bell Hooks. This is actually my 3rd time reading that book. We Will Not Cancel Us by Adrienne Marie Brown. The Other Significant Others, Reimagining with Friendship at the Center by Raina Cohen. I feel like my favorite one was Adrienne Brown's We Will Not Cancel Us. She goes through like a lot of like interpersonal, like humanizing conflict, to be honest. Because like, you know, especially in like organizing and community spaces, there's a lot of disposability. So she talks a lot about like how that actually is not in any way moving us toward any sort of progress or like the transformative justice we're seeking out, or like the dreams that we want to have for liberation. But if we want to create a world in which conflict and trauma aren't at the center of our collective existence, we have to practice something new, ask different questions, access again our curiosity about each other as species. It's a very tiny book, but I'm not like an annotator that much, but this was it. One of my favorite genres or classification was poetry. I read Feelings, A Story of Seasons by Manjit Tup, Lullabies by Lang Lev, Return Flight by Jennifer Huang, Falling Back in Love with Being Human, Letters of the Lost Soul, Devotion, Selected Poems of Mary Oliver, Princess Saves Herself in This One, The Caring by Ada Liman. I feel like I'm saying everybody's name wrong. I got the physical copy in Los Angeles when I was there in the spring, because I've always like read Mary Oliver in a disjointed manner. This is her poem, I Worried. I worried a lot. Will the garden grow? Will the rivers flow in the right direction? Will the earth turn as it's taught? And if not, how shall I correct it? Was I right or was I wrong? Will I be forgiven? Can I do better? Will I ever be able to sing? Even the sparrows can do it, and I am well hopeless. Is my eyesight fading, or am I just imagining it? Am I going to rheumatism, lockjaw, dementia? Finally, I saw that worrying had come to nothing and gave it up, and took my old body and went out in the morning and sang. She has a way with words. It's very transformative. It feels like a devotion. It feels like one of those things you pick up once in a while to just kind of, I don't know, ground. It's very perceptive. It's very passionate. I love poetry that is unapologetically like passionate, if that makes sense. My back hurts a little bit. Getting older. Tragedy of Heterosexuality by Jane Ward, The Identity Trap by Yasha Mong, Cobalt Red, How the Blood of the Congo Runs Our Lives by Siddharth Kara, Refusing Compulsory Sexuality, A Black Asexual Lens on Our Self-Obsessed Culture by Sharonda J. Brown, Sounds Fake But Okay by Sarah Costello, The Will to Change, Men, Masculinity and Love, Black Ghost of the Empire, Long Death of Slavery and the Failure of Emancipation by Chris Minjipra, Dopamine Nation by Anna Lembick, Real Self-Care, a Transformative Program for Redefining Wellness by Dr. Pooja Lakshmi. I think it was a very good year for understanding the world around me. I think my favorite books definitely are Refusing Compulsory Sexuality by Sharonda J. Brown and The Black Ghost of the Empire, which is a story of the post-Reconstruction era, but specifically in the Caribbean and like kind of beyond the South. The narrative usually is told in the mindset of like what else happened in the South and how the North reacted to it. It's very America centric. So this goes beyond that and kind of talks about like what about the rest, and talks about colonialism in the global South, and like largely extending how Reconstruction has affected countries like Haiti and Saint Martin, like all of these places that are in the Caribbean, in a materially meaningful way that's still like we're seeing today. That's like true for the South especially, but I think this is like a new type of retelling from someone who's kind of like shifting the narrative to be a little bit more global South. The Will to Change by Bell Hooks is probably one of the most impactful reads I read this year. I'm gonna read you one of my favorite quotes. Create loving men, we must love males. Loving maleness is different from praising and rewarding males for living up to sexist-defined notions of male identity. Caring about men because of what they do for us is not the same as loving males for simply being. When we love maleness, we extend our love whether males are performing or not. Performance is different from simply being. In a patriarchal culture, males are not allowed to simply be who they are and the glory of their unique identity. Their value is always determined by what they do. In an anti-patriarchal culture, males do not have to prove their value and worth. They know from birth that simply being gives them value, the right to be cherished and loved. I feel like this book kind of made me uncomfortable a lot of the time, and that is on purpose, because there is like a culture of anti-maleness, and I'm not talking about like men are trash. I feel like that's like just internetness, but I think when that really sinks in as something that we believe in, rather than thinking about like the larger systems at play that make men act out and be in the way that they are, it's a very like uncomfortable and like self-reflective book. I thought she talks a lot about how when we start to criticize maleness and the way that men are in society, we are implicitly saying something bad about women. That's why like there's like this push to not bring up the failure of women as mothers, as sisters. It's not like an individual responsibility only, but like as a collective, as a village, and then eventually as a society, you are kind of told to be like, you're like a pick-me, or you're like this way or that way. It's very reductive on the internet, right? It doesn't really allow us to have an expansive conversation about what we're doing and what type of culture we are building. Kind of broke my brain a little bit, made me uncomfortable a lot. Highly recommend it, especially in the patriarchal disrupted theme of books. Is there any books that you want to throw away from Bell Hooks? I don't think so. Fantasy has been one of the genres that it's really hard for me to get into it. I mean, I definitely like Parable of the Sower type of writing and fantasy, when real life kind of connects a little bit with the way the fantastical world is built by the author. My favorite fantasy novel this year is A Master of Jinn, and it's the only one I read by Djali P. Clark. My cousin actually recommended. She was like, you have to listen to the audiobook because the audiobook performance was incredible. I was listening to the audiobook, it was like 17 hours or something, and I remember just having the time of my life. It was like on a really long bus ride. I really like the realism and like the commentary, rigid culture, and like these bureaucraticness that surround the fantastical world, but it's also like a larger allegory about like things in the system, right? I also read a couple of classics, even though classics is a very polarizing term. I read Their Eyes Are Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. I read it in high school, but I don't really like remember that much. My friend actually was like, this was her first Zora Neale Hurston, and she was like, you have to read. I had like Barracoon on my TBR, so I was gonna read that first, but then I read Their Eyes Are Watching God by Zora. It's so fucking good. I feel like, I'm sure there's like a specific term for the type of culture capture that she did of the South and like living in the South, and like how you feel like you're like in a play, you feel like you're witnessing the people in the town, the gossiping. It's so incredibly Black. Yeah, it was wonderful. I of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde, a Room of One's Own by Virginia Woolf, and then I read Inferno by Dante Alighieri, which was actually hard to read, so I had to like retry it again and be focused and have like the physical copy with me. Like I had to get the PDF because there's so many versions of it. But it was good. It was good. Highly. It was like it took me maybe 4 hours to read through it. I get the hype of Oscar Wilde. I feel like, you know, has been one of those authors that always felt like a little inaccessible, but actually it's like once you get used to the type of writing, it's not bad. Like it's actually not that bad. It's like pretty intuitive. Like, you know, you kind of get used to the writing. Yeah, this book has a lot of like shame, repentance, and like youthfulness, and like all of these things that are very real. But you know, it was written many years ago. Was it 1920? I actually don't know. Revised in 1890, so it must be written before that. But it's very like human themes that are universal in a lot of ways. So I think being able to read it in 2024 definitely was like a ride. It was a ride. The prose is incredible. There's a lot of like putting people on a pedestal, and you see your exterior as sort of like being a defining character of who you are and all these things. So Henry, one of the characters, says, then said Lord Henry, rising to go, then my dear Dorian, you would have fight for your victories. As it is, they are brought to you. No, you must keep your good looks. We live in an age that reads too much to be wise and that thinks too much to be beautiful. It's so like fucked up. It's about like eternal youth and like what does it look like when you're no longer like, it's like the fear of aging, things that are very like based for like this time. It's the themes are so universal is what I'm saying. Probably my favorite book, I don't know, like it's I read it in 2 days. It is Virginia Woolf's recounting of her talking about like in order for you to write as a woman, you basically have to have resources and your own time to be able to do so. And so that's why it's called A Room of One's Own. It's very honest, very uncomfortable, because it's coming from like a comfortable white queer-ish lady from the 20s. So she had very different experience. Tries to contextualize herself as much as possible, like unapologetically writing like a woman, which I feel like is such an important thing. She said, but it is obvious that the values of women differ very often from the values which have been made by the other sex. Naturally, there is so. Yet, it is masculine values that prevail. Speaking crudely, football and sports are important. That's in quotes. The worship of fashion, the buying of clothes, trivial. And these values are inevitably transferred from life to function. This is an important book, the critic assumes, because it deals with war. This is an insignificant book because it deals with the feelings of women in a drawing room. She was like, be unapologetically, be a woman in your writing is one of the best advices. I mean, it's also extends to be yourself as you, and she says like, don't write to influence people, write to feel, write to say what you want to say. She says that there's this hierarchy of books. I think this is a conversation we're having, right? Like in literary fiction spaces where people are like, no, like people should not be reading smut or whatever. Who gives a shit? You know what I'm saying? Like if it helps people to continue to read, it's about continuing to read. The thing is, like, as more people read, they're gonna understand there's specific types of writing they like. There's definitely an issue. Talk, booktube, all of those spaces where people talk about like, well, I read like literary fiction. I even think about like contemporary novels being compared in this way of like romance is usually not literary fiction. It has to be separated because it's about feelings, it's about love. I feel like if the writing is able to appeal and hold you and let you sit and focus on that book, I feel like that's what we need. I don't know why when it became such a status symbol. I think it's a privilege to read and be able to actually like retain the information. But some books you just like read them to enjoy that moment, to kind of, you know, help you spike up a little bit and you move on. It's literally not that deep and we need to calm down. He talks about like Jane Austen and the writing of Jane Austen, how incredibly deep it feels compared to like other authors that she mentions, other female authors who try to manufacture their femaleness and she's talking about like the types of things they write, or like kind of create an adjacency to other men writers to kind of be valued more. She has criticism around that too, and it felt really, really, really important and valuable. Yeah. Literary fiction, I read The Woman in the Purple Skirt by Natsuko Imamura, Yoke by Mary H.K. Choi, Deisada Murasaki, Bookshop by Satoshi Igasawa, Halloween Party by Agatha Christie, The Last White Man by Mohsin Hamid, and Some of My Best Friends by Donald Warman. I think my favorite one was probably The Woman in the Purple Skirt by Natsuko Imamura. It's a psychological thriller, a slice of life type of book. And to be honest, I love how Japanese writers, they don't really have closure usually. They're kind of like, okay, that's it. This lady was obsessed with this girl, and at the end, I'm not gonna spoil it, but she's like, at the end, she did this, and you're like, what the fuck? And I just love that. There's such like trust in the audience to figure it out. A lot of psychological thriller, especially in the West, tries to wrap it up with this like bow. I'm being generalized obviously, but like it's so good. I think my least favorite one was probably Deisada Murasaki, Bookshop. Even though I saw this book everywhere, I did not like it. Not because of the story. The story was really appealing. It's a slice of life of this woman who got broken up and she quits her job and goes to work at her uncle's bookshops. And you know, on the surface, very good, but the story and the characters felt perfectly flawed that it was flawless. So it was not as appealing for me because of that. But that's just me. So in terms of short stories, I read The World Doesn't Require You by Amilcar Brian Scott and After the Funeral by Agatha Christie. I read a lot of Agatha Christie this year. I really like her writing. The World Doesn't Require You is probably my favorite short story ever. Yeah, unless I'm gonna be reading Bloodwork, I think it's called, by Octavia Butler. My sister gave it to me as a gift, and I mean, unless that changes things, every story just felt like, I mean, it is a larger allegory about the like world we're living. It felt really humanizing, but also incredibly like tender at the same time. Violence wasn't covered up or manufactured to serve a purpose. It was just, he was just writing. The last category or classification is graphic novels. I didn't read a lot this year. This book, I reread it, but it was one of my favorite. Everything is Beautiful and I'm Not Afraid. It's Yao Xiao's, like, I think only writing, and like it's about like queerness and like being queer and immigrant, chosen families, beautiful. Like it reminds me of like when I was a little kid, I used to read this type of books. So the graphic reminded me of that. Very beautiful. But I didn't read a lot of graphic novels this year, even though I read a lot every year. Watch Day Diaries by Jamila Rouser. This was a book that my sister had, and I was just like, she brought it from the library, and I was so excited. It was nothing deep, but sometimes that's what we want. It was also beautifully illustrated. I kind of want the physical copy, actually. The Solo Travel Handbook by Lonely Planet. It was about time. I've been solo traveling since I was 18, and I was like, let me see what's up. I didn't find anything surprising. There were some resources that were new to me, so that was nice. I read The Parable of the Sower. Parable of the Sower, the graphic novel, which was adapted by Damian Duffy. Beautiful. My friend actually also read it. Yeah, so good, so good. It's a story of apocalypse. Octavia Butler basically predicted a lot of the shit that is happening right now, and this was written in the 80s, I believe. Like the book itself, not the graphic novel. The graphic novel is from a couple of years ago. So that is all the books I read in 2024. So one of the things I'm not going to be doing in 2025 is I'm not going to be setting any reading goals, at least volume wise. I think it's really helpful. I think when you're in a large slump, to be like, I'm gonna read 10 books at least. It's good to keep track of yourself and hold yourself accountable in a public way. But you know, it's like, I don't think there's a reason for me to have that type of accountability. Like I said, I read by the mood. I know I'm reading The Queer Art of Failure. Really, really good. Really, my friend recommended that. I'm also reading Catfish and Mandala. And then I'm going to be getting more into the Beyond Bollywood with the cultural politics of South Asian diasporic film. I've been watching Bollywood since I was probably 5, and I have been reading little by little of this book. It's kind of, I mean, it's like an academic book. Very good. I am working on a documentary right now, so this is going to, I think, help me shape more and more of like what type of story I want to tell. I learned about like something called cultural fabulation the other day, and I was like, holy shit. And so there's just a lot of books that I have a desire to read, and I don't want to read just nonfiction books. You know, I do have some fun fluffy books that are prepped too. Yeah, so 2025, I think my reading goals are read by the mood, read by however you want to. There's a lot of books that my sister had recommended, and I'm gonna take it on. I said this in my last video, but reading books that other people have recommended is one of the best love languages that I can think of, or movies or shows or whatever. So that's what I'll be doing. Yeah, what are y'all reading, and how was your reading journey in 2024? How did it feel? Things you would change for 2025? Let me know in the comments. Okay.